Ethan Cole was never the kind of man who sought adventure. He liked quiet work, calm air, and the slow hum of a research lab. But when the invitation came from the planet Oralis, everything in his life changed. He had spent years studying alien ecosystems, learning how different worlds grew life in strange and beautiful ways. So when the Galactic Council needed a human observer for a royal wedding on Oralis, his name was chosen. It sounded simple enough, a cultural visit, a chance to observe and represent Earth. But from the moment he saw that glowing envelope, he felt a strange pull, as if fate had other plans. The journey took 4 weeks through deep space. Ethan's ship moved silently past glowing nebulae and broken moons until finally, Oralis appeared like a gem in the darkness. The world shimmered under twin suns, its oceans glittering like melted glass. The landing bay was made of smooth silver stone, and tall beings with faintly glowing skin greeted him. They were graceful and almost fragile-looking, their movements calm and fluid. The air smelled faintly of flowers and light rain. Ethan had studied their culture before coming, but nothing had prepared him for how peaceful and dreamlike it felt to stand among them. He was escorted to the capital, a floating city called Varela. The buildings rose like crystal towers, bending light in strange ways. Transparent walkways hung between them, and rivers of liquid light ran through the streets. He saw children with glowing eyes chasing small floating orbs, and merchants selling cloth that shimmered like starlight. The entire city looked like a painting made of energy and silence. For the first time, Ethan understood why the galaxy called Oralis the City of Light. At the palace gates, tall guards bowed and led him inside. The palace itself seemed alive, humming softly as if responding to the emotions of those inside. Servants moved quietly, carrying trays of shining fruits and cups that misted like clouds. The royal banners displayed a symbol of 2 intertwined lights, a mark of unity. Ethan was shown to a balcony that overlooked the gardens, where he saw hundreds of guests arriving. Some came from other planets, each one wearing their culture's finest colors. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a gathering of entire worlds. When he met the king of Oralis, he was surprised by the kindness in his voice. The king was tall, his silver robes glowing faintly with symbols that shifted like ripples on water. "You are the human observer," the king said, smiling. "Earth has come far. You are most welcome among us." Ethan bowed politely, unsure of what to say. The king's eyes held both wisdom and weariness, as if he carried the weight of his people's peace. Then Ethan saw her. Princess Sarai entered the hall quietly, wearing a dress that looked woven from moonlight. Her hair shimmered with soft blue light, and her eyes reflected the stars outside the windows. Everyone bowed as she passed, but Ethan froze for a second, unable to look away. She wasn't smiling. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried something else, something sad, maybe even frightened. When their eyes met for just a moment, she quickly turned away as if afraid someone might notice. Later, during the reception before the ceremony, Ethan spoke with other guests. They talked about trade routes and politics, but he could sense unease beneath the polite words. Oralis was famous for peace, yet people whispered about tension between the royal family and the Trian clans, the faction from which the groom came. The marriage, he learned, was not only for love but for diplomacy. It would unite 2 powerful houses, or at least that was the hope. As the suns began to set, the palace lights changed to gold and rose. Musicians played gentle melodies, and the air filled with the scent of crystal blooms. Ethan watched the princess walk toward the ceremonial hall with slow, careful steps. Her face was calm, but her eyes searched the crowd, almost as if looking for help. He didn't understand the feeling that stirred in his chest, but something about her made him uneasy. She looked trapped, like a bird standing on the edge of a cage she could not escape. The master of ceremonies approached Ethan and reminded him that as a guest of Earth, he would sit in the observer's circle close to the throne. He nodded, adjusting his formal uniform, trying to look composed. Yet his mind wandered. Why had she looked that way? Why did it feel as though this wedding was not a celebration, but a quiet storm waiting to happen? When the bells rang to announce the start of the wedding, the great doors opened. The hall glowed with silver light as the bride and groom entered. The groom, Lord Varen, was tall and proud, his armor shining under the crystal lamps. He smiled like a man who had already won. Sarai walked beside him with measured grace, her hands trembling slightly as she held the ceremonial bond ribbon. The guests stood, their glowing eyes watching in silence as the couple approached the altar. Ethan watched too, feeling the stillness settle around him. The air seemed too heavy, the music too slow. He could not explain why, but his heart began to race. Something was wrong. He could feel it, not in the air, but deep inside, like the calm before lightning. And though he had come to Oralis only as an observer, not as a hero or participant, he already sensed that his life was about to change forever. He sat quietly as the ceremony began, unaware that before the night was over, his name would be spoken across the galaxy in wonder and disbelief. The great hall of Oralis was glowing like a sky filled with living stars. Hundreds of guests sat in perfect silence as the wedding ceremony began. Ethan sat in the observer's circle, a small seat near the back, wearing the formal dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Around him, alien dignitaries whispered softly, their voices sounding like wind through glass. The music came from instruments that floated in the air, strings of light that hummed when touched. Everything about the place was breathtaking, but the beauty could not hide the strange heaviness Ethan felt. Princess Sarai stood at the front beside her groom, Lord Varen. Her gown shimmered like running water, and her crown glowed faintly with blue light. She looked perfect, but her hands trembled slightly. Ethan noticed every small movement, how her shoulders stiffened when Varen touched her hand, how her smile never quite reached her eyes. The king sat proudly on his golden chair, his face calm, though his eyes watched the couple closely. The queen looked tense, clutching a crystal orb that pulsed gently in rhythm with her heartbeat. The ceremony began with an ancient chant. The Aurelian priest raised a glowing crystal, the size of a human heart, called the Bondstone. It was said to test the truth of the hearts that joined before it. If both souls were honest, the crystal would shine in harmony. If not, it would flicker or even fracture. Ethan had read about it in the cultural notes, but seeing it in person felt different. It pulsed with real life, glowing brighter whenever it neared emotion. The priest's voice echoed softly. Let the union of Oralis and Tryon be bound by truth, sealed by light and honored by the stars. Varen lifted his hand and placed it over the crystal. The stone glowed with steady golden light. He looked proud, almost smug. Then Sarai lifted her hand. Her touch made the stone pulse gently, and the light grew softer, almost white. For a moment, everyone smiled. The room filled with relief. It seemed the ceremony would go well after all. But then, as the vows were spoken, something subtle changed. Varen spoke loudly, declaring promises of loyalty and power. The words sounded practiced, his tone firm and cold. When it was Sarai's turn, her voice trembled. She hesitated, glancing once toward her father, then toward the guests. Finally, her eyes drifted across the hall, and for a brief moment they met Ethan's. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The priest looked confused. Princess Sarai, he said softly, you may begin your vow. Sarai took a slow breath. Her hand pressed tighter against the crystal. The light flickered once, then again, and suddenly a loud crack filled the air. The bondstone split in half. A gasp spread through the hall. The music stopped. The guests stood, stunned, staring at the broken crystal lying on the floor. The golden light that had filled the hall dimmed to gray. Ethan could feel the tension rising like heat. On Oralis, such a thing was unheard of. A broken bondstone meant the universe itself rejected the match. The king rose from his throne, his voice booming through the chamber. Who has interfered with the sacred bond? Varen's eyes flashed with anger. He turned toward the human section. It must be them, he shouted. The off-worlder's presence has tainted the ritual. Ethan stood quickly. I did nothing, he said calmly, though his heart raced. I only came as an observer. The priest raised his hand for silence. His glowing robe shimmered faintly as he examined the crystal pieces. No interference, he said slowly. The fracture came from within the bond. The energy rejected the joining. Whispers filled the room. The king's expression softened slightly, but he looked confused. Then what must be done? The law is clear, the priest replied. When the bondstone rejects one union, another must be formed to restore balance. The princess must choose again before the sun set, or the blessing of the oral heart will fade from the royal line. Ethan didn't fully understand, but he could feel every eye turning toward Sarai. The princess stood quietly, her head bowed. She looked frightened at first, but then something changed. Slowly she lifted her gaze, her eyes calm now and her voice clear. "I will choose," she said softly. Baron spun toward her, his voice rising. "You will not disgrace me before the galaxy." But Sarai ignored him. She turned toward the guests, scanning the faces until her gaze stopped on Ethan. The hall grew utterly silent. She took one slow step forward, then another. "I choose the human," she said. The words hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. Every being in the hall froze. The king stood, disbelief in his eyes. The queen covered her mouth in shock. Baron's face twisted in rage. Ethan felt his mind go blank. "The human?" The king repeated slowly, his voice trembling with disbelief. Sarai nodded. "He came not with power or pride. He looked at me as if I were more than a symbol. He carries no lies in his heart. The bond stone will know this." The priest's eyes widened, unsure if the princess was serious. The crowd murmured, some in outrage, some in awe. Ethan tried to speak, but no words came. How could this be happening? He had only come to watch, yet now the fate of the ceremony and maybe the peace between worlds hung around him like a storm. The king finally spoke again, quieter now. "Human, you have heard her claim. Aurelian law gives you the right to accept or decline. What is your answer?" He took a slow breath and stepped forward. "I don't understand your customs," he said honestly, "but I know when someone needs help. If this is your choice, then I will stand by it." A gasp spread through the hall. The priest's eyes widened. The queen covered her mouth, and even the king leaned back slightly as if struck by surprise. The human had agreed. The ceremony could continue, but now the bond would join two worlds, not just two people. "Then let it be done," the priest said softly, his voice trembling with wonder. Servants hurried forward with a new bond stone, one even larger than before, glowing faintly with blue light. The broken pieces of the first crystal were collected and carried away, their faint glow fading as they left the room. Ethan was guided to stand beside the princess. The distance between them felt heavy, filled with the breath of 1,000 watching souls. "Place your hand upon the crystal," the priest instructed. Ethan hesitated, then pressed his palm gently against the cool surface. The light inside flickered once, then began to pulse softly, almost as if responding to his heartbeat. Sarai lifted her hand and placed it beside his. Their fingers almost touched. For a moment, the hall was completely silent. Then, the bondstone began to glow. It started faint, a quiet shimmer like moonlight on water. Then the glow deepened, spreading into bright waves of color, blue, white, and gold. The light filled the hall, reflecting in every eye. A faint sound echoed, soft and musical, like a distant chorus singing in harmony. The priest gasped. "The oral heart accepts," he whispered. The king rose slowly, his face a mixture of disbelief and awe. Even Varen, standing near the shattered remains of his pride, could not look away. The bondstone had never reacted like this in recorded history. The colors danced through the air, forming small glowing trails that floated gently around Ethan and Sarai like living fireflies. Sarai's lips parted in shock. She had hoped for the bond to succeed, but not like this. The oral heart, the sacred force of their world, did not merely accept, it rejoiced. Her fear melted into relief, and for the first time that night she smiled, faintly but truly. The priest raised his voice. "The bond is sealed. The oral heart unites truth and light between Oralis and Earth." Applause filled the room, hesitant at first, then louder, though confusion still rippled beneath the sound. Ethan lowered his hand and looked at Sarai, unsure what to say. She turned toward him and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded slightly. "I don't even know what I just agreed to," he murmured back, half nervous, half honest. Sarai's eyes softened. "You agreed to save me," she said quietly. After the ceremony, the guests moved toward the banquet hall, but Ethan was taken aside by the royal guard. They escorted him through glowing corridors, where murals of ancient Aurelian kings shimmered on the walls. Finally, he was brought before the king in private chambers. The queen stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "You understand the weight of what you've done?" the king asked slowly. "You have entered the royal bloodline. The galaxy will speak of this for centuries." Ethan bowed slightly. "I didn't mean to cause harm, Your Majesty. I only wanted to respect your customs." The queen's voice was softer. "And yet the oral heart chose to bless your union. That cannot be undone." The king studied Ethan for a long moment, then sighed. Perhaps fate itself had a hand in this. My daughter's heart is her own, and now her choice has bound two worlds together. He paused, his tone heavy. You are not to leave Oralis until the union is recorded and recognized. You are now a consort of the royal house. Ethan felt lightheaded. A consort? A royal husband? This was not science anymore. This was legend. Later, as the sun set over the crystal city, Sarai stood with him on a balcony overlooking the glowing gardens. The lights below shimmered like waves in the wind. She turned to him and said softly, You have changed more than just my fate, Ethan. You may have changed the future of both our worlds. He looked at her, unsure what to say. I hope that's a good thing, he whispered. She smiled faintly, the stars reflecting in her eyes. So do I. And for the first time since leaving Earth, Ethan, the next morning on Oralis began with soft golden light spreading across the floating city. Ethan woke in a large crystal chamber that shimmered like a dream. The bed beneath him was made of woven silk that changed color with his movements. For a few seconds he didn't remember where. The words Lord Consort still sounded strange. He nodded and followed her through long, quiet halls made of living glass. Everywhere he went, servants bowed. Some smiled warmly, but others whispered behind his back. He could feel their uncertainty. He was an alien, an outsider, and yet suddenly part of their royal family. When he reached the East Garden, he found Sarai standing beside a pool of glowing water. The sunlight passed through the glass roof and painted soft colors on her silver dress. She turned when she heard him approach, and her expression softened. I hope they treated you kindly, she said gently. Ethan gave a small smile. They're polite, but I can tell they don't know what to do with me. Sarai looked down at the water, her reflection shimmering. You've caused quite a storm, Ethan. The council is divided. Some think our bond was destiny. Others think it was a mistake that will bring shame. He frowned. Do you think it was a mistake? She hesitated, then shook her head. No. I think it was the first honest choice I've made in years. They walked together along the garden path. Strange flowers glowed with pale blue light, and floating creatures like butterflies drifted between the trees. The air smelled sweet and calm. Sarai told him more about her world. Oralis believed every emotion had color, and the glowing energy around people shifted with their hearts. When she looked at Ethan, she said she saw a calm silver light, a color of truth and peace. You're different from anyone I've met, she said quietly. When others looked at me, they saw a crown. When you looked at me, you saw a person. Ethan didn't know what to say. He wasn't a hero or a prince. He was just a scientist who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. But he could see in her eyes that his presence meant something real to her. A messenger arrived soon after, bowing deeply. Your Highness, the king requests both of you in the council chamber. Sarai sighed. It begins, she whispered. The council chamber was a vast circular room filled with golden light. Around the edge sat 12 Aurelian elders, their robes shining with intricate patterns. The king sat on a raised seat, his face serious but calm. When Ethan and Sarai entered, the murmurs quieted. One elder stood. Your Majesty, he said, this union is not traditional. We must ensure it does not threaten our alliances. Another spoke sharply. The Tryon clans are already calling it an insult. They say a human has stolen their rightful bond. Ethan stood silently beside Sarai, feeling out of place. The king raised his hand for silence. The oral heart accepted the bond, he said firmly. That cannot be changed. The first elder bowed slightly. Then we must decide what this human represents. Is he to be considered royal, or is he merely symbolic? The king looked at Ethan. What say you, human? You carry no title, no power from your world. Why should you remain among us? Ethan took a slow breath. I didn't ask for this, he said honestly. But I respect your traditions. I didn't come here to take anything. If my being here brings peace, I'll stay. If it brings harm, I'll leave. All I ever wanted was understanding between our worlds. The queen, who had been silent until then, spoke softly. Perhaps that is exactly what our people need. A reminder of humility. The king's stern expression softened. So be it, he said. You will remain as consort under royal protection. Let time prove your purpose here. When the council ended, Sarai looked relieved. You handled that better than most diplomats, she told him with a faint smile. Ethan laughed lightly. I just said what was true. Later that night, they stood on a high balcony overlooking the capital. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky with streaks of violet and gold. Below them, the city lights shimmered like stars scattered across the ground. Sarai turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "My people believe the oral heart connects souls for a reason," she said softly. "Maybe you were sent here not by accident, but because our world needed someone low." "Like you." He shook his head slightly. "I don't know if I believe in fate." "Then believe in choices," she replied. "Because you made one when you stood beside me. That choice changed everything." A cool wind passed through the garden, carrying the faint hum of the city's energy. Ethan looked at her and realized that his life was no longer his own quiet path. He was part of something vast, uncertain, and beautiful. Far above them, unseen by both, ships from the Tryon clans moved through the sky. Their lights flickered in the darkness as messages of anger and revenge began to spread. But for that one quiet night, Sarai carried herself with grace, but Ethan could see the worry in her eyes. One evening, as they stood in the glowing courtyard, she spoke softly. "The Tryon clans think you took what was theirs," she said. "They forget that no one can take what the oral heart does not choose." Ethan sighed. "Do they really believe I wanted this? I didn't even understand what was happening that night." "I know," she replied, "but fear and pride make people blind. To them, it is not about truth. It's about losing power." He nodded. "I don't want to be the cause of war." Sarai turned toward him, her eyes filled with light. "You are not the cause, Ethan. You are the test." Their bond had grown quietly since the wedding. At first it was politeness and a bridge of duty and respect. But with every passing day, they learned more about each other. Ethan told her stories of Earth, of rain, of oceans, of children running in the streets. She listened with wonder, fascinated by the idea of a world that didn't glow but still held beauty. She told him of her childhood on Oralis, where she was taught to smile even when her heart wanted to cry, where her life was planned before she could choose it. One night they attended a royal feast. Music filled the air, and floating lights drifted above the tables. The guests bowed to them, but Ethan could feel a strange chill in the room. Lord Varen's name was whispered among the nobles. The king announced that Earth's delegation would stay longer to strengthen bonds between worlds, but Ethan noticed the tension in his voice. During the feast, a messenger entered the hall and whispered something to the king. His face darkened. The music stopped. "Reports from the border," he said slowly. "The Tryon fleet has gathered near the moons of Oralis." The room fell silent. Sarai's hand gripped Ethan's tightly under the table. The next morning, the king called a private meeting with Sarai and Ethan. The queen stood nearby, her calm expression hiding her concern. "Lord Varen demands an audience," the king said. "He claims he wishes to speak of peace, but I do not trust him." Ethan frowned. "You think it's a trap?" "Perhaps," the king said. "But if we refuse him, he will claim insult again. You are now part of this family, Ethan. If this was his challenge, it was made to you as well." Ethan hesitated. "I'll go," he said finally. "If he wants to talk, I'll hear him. Maybe words can do what anger can't." Sarai looked at him with worry. "You don't know their ways. They twist truth like smoke." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll keep my words simple." The meeting took place in the Hall of Winds, a grand open space where the air itself shimmered like glass. Lord Varen arrived surrounded by his followers. His armor gleamed darkly under the twin suns, and his eyes burned with pride. "So this is the human who stole my destiny," he said with a bitter smile. Ethan stood calmly. "No one stole anything," he said. "The Bondstone made its choice." "You saw it," Varen laughed coldly. "A stone cannot choose over blood and honor." He turned to the king. "Release her from this false bond, or the Tryon clans will come in force." The king's tone was sharp. "You threaten the heart's will? That is not courage. That is madness." Varen's glare turned toward Ethan. "And you, human? Do you think your weak world can protect you here? You are a stranger among gods." Ethan met his gaze calmly. "Maybe I am, but maybe that's why the heart chose me. Because I didn't come with pride." The hall went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Varen sneered but said no more. He turned sharply and left, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. After he was gone, the king let out a slow breath. "He will not give up easily," he said. "We must prepare." That night, Ethan stood alone on the balcony watching the stars. The air shimmered softly, carrying the faint hum of Oralis's energy fields. Sarai joined him, her voice gentle. "You spoke well today," she said. "My people saw your heart." Ethan turned toward her. "Do you think that matters to him?" She shook her head. "Maybe not, but it matters to me." They stood in silence for a long time, looking out over the glowing horizon. Ethan knew a storm was coming. Yet in that quiet moment, standing beside her, he felt a strange peace, the kind that came not from safety but from purpose. He had come to Oralis as a guest. Now he was part of its story, and whether peace or conflict awaited, he would face it not as a visitor, but as someone who finally belonged. The days that followed were tense and uncertain. The floating city of Varela, once full of calm music and soft lights, now carried a quiet fear in its air. Ships moved constantly above the palace, and guards patrolled the sky bridges with glowing spears. Every evening, Ethan watched the horizon where the twin suns met the clouds, wondering if the Trian fleet was already waiting beyond them. He was no soldier, no diplomat. He was just a man who had come to witness a wedding. Yet now his name was being spoken across two worlds. Some called him a hero sent by fate. Others whispered that he was a curse. But what worried him most wasn't his reputation. It was the look he saw in Sarai's eyes each night when she tried to hide her fear. The king gathered his council again. Ethan sat beside Sarai, listening quietly as the elders debated what to do. "We must show strength," one elder said. "If the Trians see fear, they will strike." Another shook his head. "Strength will not stop them. We must appeal to the heart. Let it reveal the truth of the union once more." Ethan frowned slightly. "The heart?" Sarai turned to him, her voice calm. "The oral heart is not only a belief, Ethan. It's a living energy at the core of this planet. It responds to emotion, to truth, and to intent. If we perform the light ritual before it, the heart will reveal whether our bond is pure." Ethan nodded slowly. "You think that would convince them?" The king's tone was firm. "If the heart blesses you again, even Varen cannot deny its will." It was decided. The ritual would take place at dawn inside the crystal sanctum, a vast chamber deep beneath the palace where the oral heart pulsed like a living sun. Word spread quickly through the city. Thousands gathered outside the palace to witness history, human and Aurelian standing together before the sacred light. That night, Ethan barely slept. He stood on the balcony, the stars of Oralis shining above him like quiet witnesses. Sarai joined him, wearing a robe of pale blue that glowed faintly in the moonlight. She looked calm, but he could see the worry she carried. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. "Yes," she admitted, "but not of the ritual. I'm afraid of what happens if they still don't believe." He looked at her gently. "Then we make them believe, with truth, not fear." When dawn came, the palace bells rang. Ethan and Sarai were led down a spiral path that glowed with soft white light. The deeper they went, the more the walls began to hum. It was like walking through a living heartbeat. Finally, they entered the great chamber. At its center floated a massive sphere of pure light, the oral heart. Its glow filled the room with warmth and peace. The air shimmered around it, almost alive. The priest of the sanctum stepped forward. "Let the bond be tested by truth," he said. "Let the heart see what the eyes cannot." Ethan and Sarai stepped closer, their hands trembling slightly. They reached toward the heart together. The light touched their palms, and for a moment everything went silent. Then, like a sunrise breaking the dark, the chamber burst with color. The light surrounded them, lifting their feet gently from the floor. Ethan felt warmth spreading through his chest, a quiet, powerful energy that seemed to look inside him. He saw flashes of memory, his childhood on Earth, his years of study, the moment Sarai had chosen him. And through it all, he felt no fear, only honesty. When he opened his eyes, the heart glowed brighter than he had ever seen. The walls shimmered like gold, and the air hummed with soft music that seemed to come from nowhere. The priest fell to his knees. "The heart has spoken," he whispered. "Their bond is true. Never has the heart shone with such light." The king smiled for the first time in days. Sarai turned toward Ethan, her eyes full of wonder. The light around them faded gently, leaving a quiet peace in its place. But before anyone could speak, a sudden sound echoed through the chamber, a deep rumbling roar from the skies above. The guards rushed in, breathless. "The Trian fleet has arrived." The king's face hardened. "So they could not wait for truth," he said bitterly. "They come with anger, not reason." Sarai turned toward Ethan, her hand gripping his. "They won't believe even now." Ethan looked at her with steady eyes. Then we'll show them. Not with words, but with what the heart showed us. As they ascended back to the surface, the palace shook slightly. Bright streaks of light filled the sky, Tryon ships descending, their engines burning like falling stars. The city guards formed lines, preparing to defend the royal palace. But before any violence could begin, the king stepped onto the balcony, raising his staff high. The Oral Heart's light suddenly pulsed upward from beneath the palace, spreading into the sky like a wave of gold. The clouds glowed. The ships stopped. For a long moment, all movement froze. Then slowly, the golden light spread across the Tryon fleet, wrapping them in calm brilliance. The engines dimmed. The sky turned quiet. It was the Oral Heart's will made visible, a living message of peace. The Tryon soldiers watching from their ships saw the truth with their own eyes. Their weapons powered down. The threat dissolved. Sarai looked at Ethan, tears in her eyes. "You see?" she whispered. "The heart does not lie." Ethan nodded slowly, watching the last of the light fade across the heavens. "No," he said softly. "It just needed someone to listen." That night, as the sun set peacefully over Oralis, the bells of the city rang not for battle, but for unity. The human who once came as a guest had stood beside a princess before the heart of a world, and together they had turned fear into light. The following day began with peace that felt almost unreal. The skies of Oralis, which had been filled with the dark shadows of the Tryon fleet, now shone with golden light. The storm of fear that had threatened the planet seemed to fade away like mist. The people came out from their homes, gathering in the city squares to watch the sunrise. For the first time in weeks, the bells of Varela rang not as warnings but as a song of hope. Ethan stood on the royal balcony beside Sarai, looking down at the sea of glowing faces. The citizens of Oralis cheered softly, their eyes reflecting the light that shimmered through the air. He could hardly believe that only a short time ago he had been a visitor, a stranger watching a wedding. Now he stood as part of a new beginning between two worlds. The king appeared behind them, his long robe flowing gently in the breeze. "The people see what the heart saw," he said quietly. "Truth has a way of shining brighter than fear." Sarai bowed her head. "It was the heart that guided us, Father, but it was Ethan's courage that allowed the world to see it." Ethan turned to her, shaking his head. "I didn't do anything brave. I just told the truth and held your hand." The king smiled faintly. "Sometimes that is the greatest courage of all." Later that day, the council met once again. The elders who had once doubted Ethan now spoke with calm respect. Messages came from the Tryon clans. Their ships had withdrawn beyond the moons, their leader silenced by the will of the Oral Heart. A peace delegation had been promised, and for the first time in Aurelian history, Earth was to be named an ally world under royal protection. When the meeting ended, Sarai found Ethan standing by the garden pool, looking at his reflection in the glowing water. His expression was thoughtful. "You're quiet," she said softly. He looked up at her and smiled. "I keep thinking about everything that happened. How one invitation changed so many lives. I don't know if I'll ever understand why it chose me." Sarai stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Maybe it didn't choose you. Maybe you chose it, the moment you decided to stand beside me when everyone else looked away." He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe you're right. But what happens now?" She smiled faintly. "Now we start again, together." That evening, the palace held a celebration unlike any other. Lanterns made of crystal floated in the air, casting soft light across the city. Musicians played songs of renewal, and children danced in the streets, their laughter echoing through the glowing corridors. The entire planet seemed alive with joy and color. Ethan and Sarai walked among the people, not as rulers but as symbols of unity. Wherever they went, Aurelians bowed and offered glowing petals of the moonflower, a sign of respect and blessing. The Earth delegation stood proudly beside the royal family, their faces filled with awe at the beauty of the world around them. As the night deepened, the king raised a hand, calling for silence. The crowd grew still, waiting for his words. "For centuries, Oralis lived in light, yet feared the unknown," he said. "Today a human stood before our sacred heart and it answered with truth. Let this be the day we stop fearing what is different and start seeing what is possible." The crowd cheered, their glowing eyes reflecting the brilliance of the sky. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that he couldn't quite describe. He looked at Sarai, who smiled back at him with quiet pride. When the speeches were over and the music began again, they slipped away to the balcony that overlooked the vast crystal city. The night air was cool and filled with the sound of distant laughter. Sarai leaned against the railing, her silver hair shining under the twin moons. "You know," Ethan said softly, "when I left Earth, I thought I was just coming to study another world. I never thought I'd become part of one." Sarai turned to him, her expression soft and full of light. "You didn't just become part of it, Ethan, you changed it." "You changed me," he smiled shyly. "I think it changed me too." They stood in silence for a while, watching the glowing rivers that flowed through the city below. Ships drifted peacefully through the sky, their lights reflected in the glass towers. Everything felt calm, alive, and full of promise. Sarai looked up at him, her voice quiet. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Ethan thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. Earth will always be my home, but home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person." Sarai's eyes glimmered softly, and for a moment neither spoke. The sound of music floated through the air, gentle and distant. Then she smiled. "Then I hope you stay, for as long as the stars will shine." He nodded, his voice low. "I'm not going anywhere." As the moons rose higher, a gentle wind swept across the balcony, carrying with it the faint hum of the aural heart deep below the palace. Its rhythm pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, eternal, and full of life. In that quiet moment, Ethan understood what it truly meant. The heart wasn't just a source of light. It was a reflection of every truth, every bond, every small act of kindness that shaped the worlds around it. And somehow he had become part of that story. The bells of Oralis rang again, soft and clear, echoing across the floating city. Below, the people danced under the twin moons, celebrating a peace that had once seemed impossible. Ethan looked out at the horizon and smiled. "I came here to watch a wedding," he said softly, "and somehow I found a life." Sarai laughed quietly, her voice like music in the night. "And the universe found a way to surprise us both." As the stars shimmered above them, the human and the princess stood hand in hand, their bond glowing faintly in the moonlight. A promise between two hearts, two worlds, and a future built not on power, but on understanding. And high above, the aural heart pulsed once more, brighter than ever, as if it too smiled at the unity it had created.